Humans. There has been a growing number of stories that I watch and read about gentrification and its evils, and, how the machinations of white people taking over formerly black neighborhoods and displacing people out of their homes, and, this kind of with this sense of malicious intent. Yeah. And I'm one of those evil gentrifiers. And I wanted to tell a quick story about my home. I grew up in a mixed neighborhood in the South, 50-50, white and black. I lived in the neighborhood from the time I was 5 until I was 17. So 12 years in that same house. And, the same kind of neighborhood. We went to school together. We played together. We did sports together. We fought. It was a mixed neighborhood. That's what it was. It was familiar to me. And so I moved up to Atlanta after high school to go to school. And as most young people, I kind of bounced around and lived in apartment after apartment. And, I was a musician at the time after I got out of college. And I remember a 3-bedroom apartment we had where often 5 people in that 3-bedroom apartment and sleeping on the couch. And we're a bunch of poor musicians. And, you had to scrape your pennies together to try to find something that was affordable. And this place was not bad and decent location, had a pool and some pretty girls around. And, but, we were scraping our money together. I think we paid probably $150, $175 a piece, for this apartment, which is a lot of money at that time when you're a struggling musician. So I did that for many years and started to build my music career and was a performer. And then I started a music production company, and I did music for radio and television commercials. And that's when I finally started to make a little bit of money, and I was able to save some money. So that about the time that I was 30 years old, I landed a big job that there was enough profit that I could put a little bit over to the side. Finally, for the first time in my life, I was kind of ahead enough to be able to put some money aside. And so I did that, and I always wanted a house for so many reasons. I planned to have a family at some point, and I wanted to have that. And I also, just from an investment standpoint, from the tax benefit of being able to write off interest and all those things, it's an part of the American dream, owning your own home. I was no different. So I began shopping for homes. And as an artist, I was aesthetics are always a concern or interest for artists. And I didn't want just any old house that I could afford. I wanted the kind of house that had the kind of style that I really wanted. And some of my favorite neighborhoods in the area that I lived in had lots of craftsman bungalows. Craftsman bungalows were very popular in the early part of the 20th century. They were actually sold out of the Sears catalog. You could leaf through, hence the name Craftsman, Sears Craftsman. These were homes that would sold as kits, and you could leaf through the Sears catalog, and I don't know how many different kinds of homes they had. Let's say there were 10 different styles, and you could buy one of these out of the catalog, and then they would deliver it to the curb of your plot of land. And then I think it was up to you to either build it, assemble it yourself, or find a crew to help you, to build it for you. But I really loved that style of home. I found it very charming. Hardwood floors with inlaid, different woods that were inlaid in these beautiful, beautiful crown moldings and high ceilings. And, just the whole aesthetic was really appealing to me. Now, I had grown up in a ranch home, and so that wasn't, I'd done that, I just didn't care for the aesthetics. Now, to be honest, I have some friends with some ranch homes that are absolutely beautiful. And as I look to buy probably the last home in my life, I've lived in this one for a long time. I'm kind of I put my roots down and stay in places. I don't move around a lot. And as I look to buying a home for my old age, it'll probably be a ranch. It'll be a 1-story home. I've got 2 stories right now, and I can do the math. I can see the future where walking up and down those steep stairs is not going to be something that my old ass is going to want to do. So, but at the time, I didn't want a ranch house. I wanted a craftsman bungalow. And all of the bungalows that were available in the neighborhoods that I was familiar with, and had rented in, were just way out of my price range. They had all the aesthetic, but I didn't have all the money to move into that. So I had to look elsewhere. But I was very strategic about it, right? I wasn't just kind of doing some random stuff. I hired a realtor, and I told her exactly what I wanted. Those different things I mentioned, the high ceilings and the hardwood floors and the craftsman. That's what I wanted her to show me, and that's all I really wanted to see. And I told her what my budget was, and she said, well, we're just going to have to kind of expand the range of where you've been looking because you can't afford in these nicer neighborhoods. They're just, they've just appreciated too much over the years. So let's look elsewhere. And she took me to a neighborhood in the city of Decatur that was called Oakhurst, and Oakhurst was on the south side of the tracks, literally the south side of the tracks. The railroad tracks divide the city of Decatur, the north side from the south side. And as in most cities, we kind of were held true to form. If you lived on the south side of the tracks, you were typically less prosperous than the folks who lived on the north side of the tracks. We find this all over the place in cities all around the country. And this was another example of that. Gentrification had yet to reach this neighborhood, and so the homes, the stock of homes that was available there, the inventory, had the homes at the kind of the price that I could afford, finally. And so she showed me one home after we had looked at about, I don't know, I bet I looked for a month or so, and we probably saw 10, 15 different homes. The minute I walked into this home, I knew that was it. I just knew it had everything, and it was at the price that I could afford. And I said, this is it. And I'm self-employed, and I'm an artist. Talk about qualifying for a loan. That's hard, man. It's hard. Self-employed artist. The banks don't look too kindly at you. I don't care if you're a white person or not, or whitish in my case. That's hard. That's hard to do. And I was so nervous, but my credit was good enough, and I had enough money, and I'd had enough, decent, consistent earnings for the past few years that I finally was in a place where I could qualify for a mortgage, and I qualified, and so I got the home. One of the proudest moments of my life. Here we are in a neighborhood that was largely black. I would say at the time that I moved in, Oakhurst was probably 60% black. It was the result of white flight in the 70s. Oakhurst was originally a kind of a mill town employee community. There were lots of factories and mills closer to the city of Atlanta, or in the city of Atlanta. And this was kind of a suburb where a lot of those workers would live. And they built these craftsman homes. They were cheap and affordable at the time. And they lived in them until about the 70s, at which point a number of economic factors, began to converge. Now, this is a very complex thing. The way you hear the story of gentrification told is often just overly simplistic. But it's a really complex story of lots of vectors and forces and influences, macro and micro effects that are going on that create this environment. Suburbs were beginning to, after World War II, there was a big building boom, and and suburbs began to grow, and so and also there was a move to the city for Black people began to congregate in major cities, and so you had these two factors. You had this suburb growth, and then you had Blacks moving into the city, and that led to Black people living in more proximity to white people in a way that they never had. So white people at that time, this was all too new. You know, they were afraid to live around Black folks. There were any number of stereotypes, and some factually based, and some just, you know, fear based. But that led to white flight. And there was a sufficient inventory of all these suburban homes in a growing suburbia that those white people fled to. And so when some Black people began to move into the Oakhurst neighborhood, more of the white folks who were there were saying, yeah, this is a good time for us to move out to the suburbs. And so they did. And over time, all the Black families took over those homes. By the time that I moved in, and this would be around the time of the Atlanta Olympics, around 1996, like I said, there were a lot of, it was primarily a Black neighborhood, which was comfortable and familiar to me, which was, there would have been a lot of white people that realtor would have shown that home to, who, seeing all the Black neighbors, would just go, no, I ain't got, show me something else. But I grew up in a mixed neighborhood. It was fine with me. I was comfortable. And so what I found there were a lot of families. It was an interesting pattern. I would say that on my street in particular, there were a lot of families that were, the head of household was an elderly mother who now owned the home after her husband had died. And she had a number of kids who had practically free home because the mortgage had been paid off. And you had, you know, fairly large number of people living in a fairly small home because it was cheap or free. And I saw that over and over again. And it was 2 doors down, there was a crack house. And that's not the first time I had lived in a neighborhood where there was a drug dealer. In the neighborhood that I grew up in, there was a drug dealer in my neighborhood. Didn't live 2 doors down from me, but that was the case here. I still remember that brother who, like I just described, lived in a house that was owned by his mother, and there were probably, I don't know, there may have been 8 people living in that 3-bedroom house. And that house was the hub of activity day and night, mostly at night, and just hanging out in the streets and carousing and making noise and all the things that happen around a drug house. But it never impacted me. I had some petty theft. I mean, people, when I first moved in, my home was the first home in the neighborhood that had been renovated. And the man who owned the house, the man who I purchased the home from, was a white man. He was a former military officer. His family had lived in there for many years, and then they moved to the suburbs in the 70s, and they began to rent out this house to a Black family or Black families. I don't know about all of their stories, but the family that moved out just before I purchased the home was as I recall the story, had a mentally ill child who lived upstairs, and I remember some of the writing on the walls and writing on the doors, and it was that family was, I think at a certain point, Colonel B, as I'll call him, Colonel B said, he was 70 years old at the time, and he decided that, he had been renting this house out for a long time and he was ready to sell. He probably purchased the house for $20,000 and it was now worth 5-6 times that. And he may have needed the money for his retirement and just got tired of renting out to people. So, up it goes on the market. But he wasn't just going to put it on the market as is. He actually invested some money to do some renovations, and they enclosed an outdoor porch. They built out the upstairs and converted the attic into a bedroom and a walk-in closet and a bathroom, and he put some money into it. And it was probably one of the very first renovated houses in this neighborhood. And he renovated it because he wanted to get the best price he could for it. And he probably consulted with some realtors, and they said, the patterns that we're observing, gentrification is about to spill over into this neighborhood. It's about to jump over these tracks into the south side. We've seen it happen on the north side. It's about to spill onto the south side, and put a little money and you'll get an even better price on this. So he put the money in and found me. I wanted it. I'm it. And so, so there's the first thing you need to understand is kind of, why would someone want to move into this black neighborhood? Well, I was comfortable with living with black people. And what you find in neighborhood after neighborhood after neighborhood that is gentrified is that the first wave of gentrifiers, this is fairly consistent among, I haven't read tons and tons, but I've read enough to become aware that the first wave of gentrifiers is often a certain kind of person. They're often a creative, they're artists, they're musicians, they're, people who don't have a lot of money, but, have enough vision for taking this thing that is maybe kind of rough and making it better. They've got some creativity and some skill to make it the kind of place that they want it to be. And you also found a number of gay people also in that wave. And this neighborhood was not unlike that. And here I was, an artist, and I didn't have a lot of money, but I had an aesthetic that this house met. And so that's why I wanted to move in. I didn't have this grand, vision of, I'm going to go in and kick these black people out. Yeah, we'll get them all out of here. No, man. I just wanted a place to live. I wanted a nice little affordable place to live, and this was what I could afford. And so there I was. My neighbors were a lovely couple, Harold and Ann. I doubt they'll see me on this video, but what up, Harold? What up, Ann? Black couple. Harold and Ann had been living in that home for many years. They were probably in their mid-40s at the time that I moved in the home next to them. And it was once Harold's father's house. I think Harold grew up in that house. And Harold worked for a local elevator company. And so his parents owned the house, and once they passed, it became his. And Harold was sitting on a great investment. He didn't have to pay any rent. He didn't have to pay a mortgage. It was paid off. And that's a pretty sweet deal. It was a beautiful house. It still is a beautiful house. It's sold 4 or 5 times actually since they moved out, but sold it. But it was a big, beautiful craftsman bungalow. And it was cool for them. They lived in this black neighborhood, and they were black, and it felt good. Now, not all black people are the same. I have to be careful. It's hard to always mention this, but there's an asterisk every time I say black people. I'm talking about a very specific slice usually, because black people are not a monolith. They are very, very diverse. I know some super conservative black people who are whiter than some of the white folks I know. And I know really hood guys who are just, at the absolute opposite extreme of that. But it was a black neighborhood. Harold and Ann were black. And so there was kind of some basic, compatibility there. But they weren't thrilled about having a drug house, a couple of doors down from them. They didn't like that. Ann didn't particularly feel safe in that house with all the activity that went on at night, from the neighbor, all the comings and goings, so much so that she had a light installed, a street light installed outside of their home. She paid for that street light to be installed, and she paid extra money every month for that street light because she didn't want darkness in front of her house. She wanted lights. And I think she was like, the rats scurry when the lights come on. So that was her kind of logic. She wanted it illuminated so that people wouldn't be hanging out in front of her house. So that's what she did. They were good to me. Harold helped me build my back deck. We borrowed eggs and cups of sugar from one another. And I won't say that we were buddy-buddy. I got along well with Harold, and it was easy for us to hang out, and we liked to talk sports. And, he was cool, and I liked, he enjoyed my company. So we would talk, but we never really hung out a lot. Ann was a bit different. Ann was a bit more standoffish. I think Ann's experience of white people growing up, or maybe the way that she had been taught to think about white people from her parents, who probably had a rough time of it in the during their era of growing up. And so Ann was a little bit standoffish to me, but she was never mean. But I could always tell she was, I don't know about this. He's not completely white, but he's white enough, and I'm a little bit worried about that. But anyway, so once one home gets renovated in a neighborhood, and the neighborhood starts to get more traffic from the realtors who are representing people like me who had limited funds but had a very specific kind of house in mind. The neighborhood starts to get more traffic, and if you are in a renovated home, they can point to that home. The realtors can say, "See, this is what you can do if you fix it up," and it's a nice. They can be quite nice. So, consequently, you started to see more white people move in over time. Now, I loved the neighborhood just as it was. It was familiar to me, as I said, and it had all the flavor and the best parts of the black community that I enjoy. I can remember a brother dressed completely in white, a white suit. I don't know where he was heading to church or whatever, and just walking down the middle of the street singing "What's Going On," Marvin Gaye song. What a memory. I can remember the drug dealer that I mentioned, who was a drug dealer for sure. That's the way he made his money. That may have been the way he helped support, the kids. There was no father in the home, and his mother was infirm. And so I think he was the breadwinner for the home, and he made money by selling drugs. But if you don't know drug dealers, stereotypically you have a certain way of thinking about them and criminality, but I've known a few. Never been friends with him, but just proximity. And but he was a decent dude. He was a decent dude in spite of his work. I remember him walking down the street. There was a lot of stuff in the middle of the street. It's a funny thing about black neighborhoods. It's there's sidewalks, but if I want to be, I'll walk where I want to walk, and a lot of them just like walking in the middle of the street. So he'd walk in the middle of the street. "Yo, Rick, come here." And he was all dressed up in a suit. He had to go to a funeral, and he was all dressed up in a suit. And it's the first time I'd ever seen him in a suit. Big, handsome brother. Played football. He's probably 6'2", 220. Still, kind of looked like a linebacker. But here he comes walking down the street. Yeah, Rick, come here. So I walk out into the middle of the street, and he's in his suit and he has a tie draped around him. And hey, man, I don't know how to tie this. Do you know how to tie a tie? So I remember standing in the middle of the street tying his tie. There you go. You got it. Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Across the street, there was Albert. Albert was one of the neighborhood characters. Albert was probably 45 at the time, smoked crack a good amount, but a sweet man. I loved Albert. I did love Albert. Albert would come up and he had an affection for me for whatever reason. Partly because he could get money out of me every once in a while. Albert would come up to the door all the time. Hey, Rick. Hey, man, you let me rake your yard. $5. All right, Albert. $5. Go right. And Albert would go and do a good job breaking the yard. Yeah, he wouldn't wait. His Jones didn't always come during business hours. I remember Albert knocking on the door at like 11 o'clock at night one time. And I was like, who the fuck is walking on my door at 11 o'clock at night? Oh, what up, Albert? Hey, Rick. Hey, man, let me, I need $5. Let me break your yard. Albert, it is 11 o'clock at night. You got a flashlight? No, I don't have a flashlight. We're not going to do this shit at 11 o'clock at night. Gone. So Albert moved on. But that was the kind of cat Albert was. Albert also was kind of he was the king of the grapevine. Albert knew everything that was going on in the neighborhood. I remember, I used to have stuff stolen. It was usually petty crime. When I first moved in, they planted some new azaleas along the driveway. Little azaleas. They were in the ground. And within a couple of nights of me moving in, those azaleas were gone. All right. Not happy about it, but, there you go. I had a white Buddha, a big, like a concrete Buddha. I had that on the front stoop of my house, and that got stolen. And then one time I had a couple of leaf blowers, a couple of electric leaf blowers. I bought one that was really crappy, low powered, didn't work that well, and it was just, I have big trees in my yard, so when those oak leaves fall, you need something that can blow those leaves, because there were a lot of leaves in an underpowered, yeah. So I got a second one that was much better and helped me do the job better, but I held on to both of them. I couldn't return the first one and never got around to selling it. But I remember one time I was in my utility closet and need to get a tool for something, and I noticed, one of my hair blowers is missing. And I'm like, all right, I know I didn't lose it. So somebody has stolen my air blower, which meant they came into the backyard and went into that closet. So it was a little bit more invasive. I never was broken into my house, never broken into the house itself, but into this closet. So I talked to Albert and said, Albert, what, I'm missing this blower. Yeah, let me check around. So Albert comes back later that afternoon. Oh, Rick, I know who got your blower. It's Willie. All right, I know who Willie was. Willie was a kind of a slow brother. Had some developmental issues, but he was okay. He wasn't mean. I never felt threatened by Willie. I'd always give him a yo. He'd give me a yo, and he was always had his hand out asking for something. But So Albert says Willie did it, and I went and ran into Willie a couple of days later. Willie. No, actually, after Albert told me that, Willie showed back up at my house with that leaf blower. And I said, Willie, thank you for bringing it back, but why did you take it? Well, man, you had two. I didn't think you needed both of them. Right. That's my choice to make. All right, Willie. But thank you for bringing it back. I could tell stories and stories for days. Okay, but I'm just trying to generally paint the picture of a neighborhood that I felt comfortable in, and it had its issues as a neighborhood. And but I was good there. I was good there. I had a beautiful home. It was in I was still single. I could afford it. It was in a very good school district, which was important to me because I wanted to build a family. And this house was big enough. It was 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. And although I was living in it by myself at the time, I knew that I was eventually going to have a family there. That was my vision. So I was happy about that. I was laying down some plans for the future. I planted my stakes. And I loved it. I loved being in the neighborhood. And it continued to, more white people started to move in. It became, it was improving. More houses were being renovated, and people who could afford these renovations were moving in. Now, part of the narrative that goes along with gentrifiers, this evil gentrifier story, is you're driving the black people out. I cannot speak for all neighborhoods because I've not lived in all neighborhoods that have become gentrified, but I can say that this was my experience with this neighborhood. I've told you that Harold and Ann were living in a mortgage-free home. They were just sitting on, a chunk of change, basically, a house that was paid off and it was valuable. And as it gentrified, the neighborhood was just becoming more white, and it was not the same neighborhood that they had been living in. The culture shifted, and although I think they kind of liked that some of the rougher element of the neighborhood was moving out, there were fewer drug dealers, and some of the rougher elements were no longer there, and some safer white people were moving in. It's changed the texture of the culture, right? On Albert's, I got 1,000 Albert stories. I can still remember Albert, having a party over at his house. This is at 1:00 at night, and he's had a little synthesizer on the front porch, and he was playing it. He was drunk and stoned out of his head. And there was a song at the time, Danger was the hook. Danger. That's all. I just remember the hook. I wasn't familiar with the song. I do remember Danger, Danger. Albert singing. He didn't have, he may have had 4 teeth in his head. So it was always funny to talk to him and listen to him sing. So that was kind of the flavor of the neighborhood. It was that kind of thing. And that was changing. And all these white people were moving in, and I think Anne in particular, and certainly she influenced, Harold, she goes, not feeling this. We are sitting on, I think at the time that they sold, now I'm telling you, they didn't pay anything for this, okay? At the time that they sold, I bet that they sold that house for $325,000, $325,000, $350,000. And they moved to a black neighborhood called Stone Mountain, which was further out in the suburbs. And the house that they have that I'm looking at right now, the house that they had was probably about 2,500 square feet, 3 bath, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, 2 bath, 2,500 square feet. With $350,000 from this sale of a home that was an in-town home, you could buy a frickin' McMansion out in Stone Mountain, Smoke Rise, a black neighborhood where lots of middle-class folks were moving. And that was a growing middle-class community. Now, if you were Harold and Ann, what would you have done? Would you have stayed in that house and just kept on sitting on that $350,000 as more white people moved in, changing this neighborhood from what you had known and were comfortable in? Or would you go, you know what? I'm going to take that $350,000 and buy me that nice-ass, big-ass house out in this middle-class black neighborhood where all these folks are congregating. What would you do? Harold and Ann said, I'll take the money. I don't blame them. And a lot of other people made the same decision. You got to understand that once I told you that a lot of these heads of household in these homes were these elderly black women. And once they died, once the matriarch in the home died, a lot of these kids could not handle this by themselves. She was on Social Security. She may have had a pension. She may have had her husband's pension. She may have had, the mother may have had some income. A lot of these kids didn't have income. Their adult kids didn't have, they weren't working a lot. And some of them who did work a lot just, and had good jobs, just, they were in the same situation as Harold and Ann. It's like, this neighborhood's changing a lot. And so after the mother would die, after her elderly mother would die, they're like, I'm not going to stay here crowded here with my brothers and sisters, and we can make too much money by selling this thing. And we'll sell it and divide up this money among the 5 of us kids, and we'll each be able to go get our own house. Which makes financial sense. And it made sense to these black folks, and that's why they took the money. They were selling out and walked away with their pockets full of money. And the white folks were moving in. It was kind of a win-win situation. Y'all got something we want. We're going to pay you a lot of money. And then we get something that we can afford. It's a lot of money to you. It's a lot of money to us, but it's something we can afford. Yeah. And so that was the way it happened. And the neighborhood just continued and continued to gentrify. And more black families moved out of it into other neighborhoods that were probably more black. And sometimes, like I said, they just took a step up, moving further out into the suburbs. Your money goes further. Nicer house, bigger house. Yeah. These old bungalows are a handful to maintain. My home is over 100 years old. And it shows it. I mean, it's just things go wrong in old homes, and you're always having to fix something. And it's a bit of a pain in the ass versus a new home, new constructed home. It's, well insulated. It's brick. It's got, all the modern kinds of up to code kinds of features and everything. And, it's not a hard decision to make for a lot of folks, for a lot of those people. And that was something easy to do, and they did it. So I want you to understand that's the way that worked. I was part of another at the end of another wave of gentrification in New York. At a certain point in my life, before I bought this home that I'm describing, I had always dreamed of moving to New York. And I was if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. And that was a big dream. I was young and aspiring, ambitious artist and musician. That was the place I felt I needed to be. So I sold everything I had in Atlanta and moved out of an apartment that I really loved in Ansley Park. And I moved up to New York. Landed in the East Village. Landed in the West Village, Christopher Street. I'm piling in with, 3 other artists in a small, cramped apartment. And then at a later point, I moved into a loft in Soho, a sublet. Soho had also gentrified. Soho was was formerly an industrial warehouse district back in the early 20th century. It was full of warehouses and manufacturing and, textiles and all manner of things were manufactured in the southern end of Manhattan was this big industrial warehouse area. That was Soho, south of Houston Street. That's how you get Soho, south of Houston Street. And once those factories shut down, just those were the economics of, the factory shut down. There was, I'm not sure, I think they probably just relocated to more affordable places. The real estate, the taxes, everything was the numbers didn't work anymore for that being a place for industry. So here you have all of these empty lofts, these big empty warehouses. And who moved in? Same kind of folks that I told you to move in, gentrify other areas, gay folks and artists. And they moved in and they took these really rough warehouses and they converted them into these really, really cool living spaces. the space that I moved into had been done like that. The couple that owned it were a couple of painters, artists, beautiful work. And they made this amazing loft out of what was once just a barren, warehouse. It was amazing what they did. But what always happens when you gentrify is that the first wave of people come in because it's affordable, and they start to make it nice. They take this rough area and make it nice. And then all the people with more money said, okay, you pioneers went in and made that rough thing nicer, and bringing up the property values and making it nicer and safer and all that kind of stuff. All right, now we'll move in. Now we're ready to move in. Y'all were the guinea pigs. Now it's our turn. We can move in feeling safer, all right, with our investment. And that's what I saw happen in SoHo. The first people that started to move in were the businesses, big businesses. I lived on Mercer Street. And I remember the Prada store going in, just one block over in Mercer Street, one block over from Mercer. Stunning, flagship Prada store, just stunning. God knows how many millions and millions and millions of dollars they spent on, building that space out, but it was really just an impressive thing. It was no longer this rundown, funky neighborhood when Prada starts moving in. And then there's Smith & Hawken opens up a little store on the corner. Another thing that, there aren't a lot of people, a lot of artists who are prepared to spend, $75 for a artisan shovel that you could get at Smith & Hawken. So Smith & Hawken was already kind of reading the future. They had seen this happen before. We know who's going to be kind of moving into this neighborhood now that it's beginning to gentrify. And one by one, these new businesses, exclusive luxury businesses started to move in. The rents started to go up. And the people who came in and made the neighborhood, gentrified the neighborhood, largely white folks, okay? Let me dispel something. Gentrification does not only happen to black people, to people of color. Gentrification happens to humans, okay? So these artists and gay humans moved in, as they do in the early wave in most of these gentrifications. And then they made it nice. All the money starts flowing in now that it's nice or nicer and safer. And then all the money flows in, and then they price the original people who fixed the place up, the original gentrifiers, out. Okay? So the artists, had their rents raised, and they got, I'm out. I'm checking out. So then they begin to look at the next neighborhood of opportunity. I think at the time, a lot of artists from the SoHo area and a lot of the folks who are that first wave, they looked to Williamsburg in Brooklyn. I think that's where Williamsburg is, which had a lot of the same kinds of things. You had these rundown, architecturally interesting kinds of properties that were affordable and could be fixed up and were of had this community of artists and creative people and gay folks, who wanted to move in and fix it up like they'd done SoHo and these other neighborhoods that they'd done. So there went the traffic. There went all those people who were displaced out of SoHo. They moved to Williamsburg and other similar kinds of places. Subsequently, Williamsburg has, once it gentrified, all the more, affluent people started to move in. Prices go up and it gets expensive. And those same folks who gentrified have to move on to the next one, Dumbo or where, I don't know all the neighborhoods anymore. But this is just a rolling pattern, time after time after time. And it's nothing unusual. Tell me about some sinister gentrifications, but I think I just don't see this grand conspiracy. I'm telling you what my motivations were. I'm telling you the general pattern that we see when we zoom out. This is the general pattern we see in gentrification. Yes, people are displaced, but where is it written that you get to live in the same house your entire life and you never have to move? Where is it written that nothing changes? The only thing that doesn't change is change itself. That's the only thing that you can count on, is change. And the idea that you can live in a house and never expect the economic environment, the patterns of real estate investment and all the different confluences, the white flight and the people who move, it's all of that confluence of factors happens again and again and again. And I just see it being more of an economic thing rather than this sinister racial conspiracy to displace people. Change happens, and it has happened to me even now. So I am now in this home that I have lived in for nearly 30 years. And my children are, my son is, in college. My daughter will soon be in college. And I am now I will then be in a house that is much larger than I need. It has served its purpose. It fulfilled my dream. I was able to raise a family there. They were able to walk to great schools, K through 12. They walked to schools, K through 12. It's been a wonderful school district. They've received a wonderful education, and I paid the taxes for it. At one point, this city had among the highest per capita taxes in the country. It is very, very expensive. My tax bill for this house is high. A, because its value is appreciated, but B, because the city has lots of very nice amenities and you got to pay for them. Well, I no longer need to pay for the educational amenity because I've already done that. My kids have kind of, they're about to be finished completely with it. So the price that I was willing to pay to ensure their education in this school district, that's done. So I am also in a place where this property is appreciated. There are a lot more affluent people. It used to be the artists and the gay folks, and now hedge fund managers and, all these, the houses, new construction in this house, they tear down these bungalows now. What the new pattern is, they tear down these old bungalows and they build these new modern homes starting at $1 million, $1 million to $3 million homes. So the neighborhood is changing yet again. And it's changing in a way that I grew up in a mixed neighborhood. I loved the flavor of it. And now it's certainly more affluent. It's also a bit more vanilla. A lot of the color and flavor that I enjoy in culture it's a little less colorful across a number of things. I still enjoy this neighborhood and it's still full of wonderful people. But, I'm sitting on a nest egg. I'm getting older. I don't need this much room. So I will move out and I will sell to one of these more affluent people who will replace me. It's like another wave of gentrification. And if it holds true to form, something else will happen to those people. Change. So this idea that people should be able to buy a house in a neighborhood and stay there for the rest of their lives and nothing disrupt that experience is just an unrealistic expectation. It just doesn't happen that way. And then to blame this change on racism, again, I don't know all stories of gentrification. I'm only sharing two that I've had. I just don't observe it. But if you want to share with me in the comments some of these nefarious gentrification stories, no one particularly likes change, particularly if you feel that you've been forced out. But change happens to all of us. And sometimes it has a perfectly good explanation, like Harold and Ann. Man, they were sitting on a lot of money. They cashed out. And they took that and reinvested it in a nicer home, a bigger home, a newer home, an easier to manage home, in a growing middle-class black neighborhood out in the suburbs. Are we blaming them for making that choice? I just don't see I just don't get the math there. And there are a lot of other folks in that neighborhood who have the same kind of windfall, just 6 figures of money just as, boom, I sell this home and all of a sudden I got more money than I've ever had in my life. And I can retire on it. I can buy another house with it. I can, send my kids to college. Well, what are you going to do with those 6-figure lumps that you're going to get? So we hear a lot about the sad stories and these kind of anonymous faces of the gentrifiers moving in. I just wanted to put a human face on it, put an actual story to it, and to show that it's a lot more complicated. I've got some other thoughts about gentrification. There about some of these other macroeconomic factors, and it's a very complex thing. It's never as simple as we reduce it down to. The current narrative about gentrification is just really overly simplistic and poorly formulated, if you ask me. But so that's my evil gentrification story. I'm about to, change has happened to me, and I will move on at the right point, and someone will come in and it'll happen to them, and so on and so forth. So give me your thoughts in the comments below. Keep pushing. Peace.